guys, I'm Anissa and I'm back with another video, and today I wanted to share with you the statistics of 2019. It's one of my favorite type of videos, year-end videos to watch. I really enjoy the nerdiness of it, and because of also what I'm doing for work, it is a very nerdy, like I'm a numbers person, so I definitely enjoy that, and I hope that others will enjoy the nerdiness as well. I have gone a little bit more in depth with my statistics this time around than I usually do in my wrap-ups, so I hope that will make this a little bit more interesting. But overall in 2019 I read 178 books, which is definitely a lot. In terms of pages, I read 59,277 pages over 2019 with an average of 333 pages per book. So that is a very normal average length of a book, I think. In terms of books per month, it's been pretty evenly over the year. I read mostly 15 to 16 books per month, with the exception of April, June, July, November and December. April and June were my most read months, with 19 and 18 books, which is not super surprising. So like 15 to 16 books a month is my average most months, and so I like that if I can stick to that for all months and then maybe go over it a couple of times. That's always nice. In July and November I had only 13. July is definitely not super surprising to me because I am usually off for summer vacation in those months, and when I'm on summer vacation I don't listen to as many audios. I read a lot of more physical books at the time, but I also have a hard time concentrating on reading outside in the warmth if it's too hot inside or outside. So that takes away some of the reading, but also if I'm traveling and stuff, I only have time to read when I'm like on planes, maybe before bed or something like that, and not much else. So yeah, I'm not surprised that I only read 13 books those months. And November was the start of my book slump, and December was definitely the slump that took over because I only read 4 books that month, and that took the overall average of the year down to 14.8 instead of being like 16, which I think it would have been if it had been like a normal month with about 10 to 11 books. Then maybe it would have been like 16 books, but December definitely dragged down the average. In terms of genres, I read 20 science fiction books, 56 fantasies, 2 retellings, 30 contemporaries, 11 thrillers, 15 urban fantasies, 4 paranormal romances, 8 historicals, 2 paranormals, and 11 magical realisms, 3 non-fiction, 0 classics apparently, and 7 horror books, and 9 mysteries. Not surprisingly to me, obviously fantasy is the most read genre, and urban fantasy is also fantasy. I know that, but I like to track urban fantasy being my favorite subgenre, so I want to see how much I actually read from that. So on top of those 56 fantasy books, you have to add in those 15 urban fantasies as well. So instead of 56 books, it's actually 71 books instead that was fantasy out of the 78 books. But I'm actually a little bit surprised that my second highest genre is contemporary, but it's also shortly followed by sci-fi. But overall I'm happy with my reading and how varied the genres are in total. I like how that looks in a chart, and it sort of confirms to myself that I do try to read from every genre. I'm not too picky about the type of genres that I read from, but like fantasy is my easiest go-to, so I always have a fantasy going, but I also enjoy reading contemporaries, thrillers, horrors, and all other type of genres. In terms of format, I read 14 hardcovers, 33 paperbacks, 7 mass markets, 13 ebooks, 91 audios, and 20 graphic novels or manga. Not surprisingly, audio takes the first place. No one's surprised anyway. And also not surprisingly, the mass market part is my least read type of format, my least read format, because I think I don't consider these mass markets. I know there are, but they're the kind that's not as annoying to read. Mass markets is those that I find difficult to actually open the page to the page that I'm looking at. So I don't really like those, but so I don't read a lot of them, but I have marked myself down to have read 7 mass markets, and I think some of them have been Terry Pratchett books, but it couldn't have all been them because I read 8 of them over the years, so yeah. In terms of length, like the majority of my books, yes, they are novels. I have 144 novels. I have 5 novellas, 1 short story, 3 novelettes, 20 graphic trades, 1 poetry book, and 4 short story collections. So no one's surprised that the novel, it takes the highest spot. But I'm happy I read from almost all sorts of lengths. The only one I haven't this time around has been anthologies, but I've read short story collections. That's more or less the same. Anthologies are just a mix of authors, whereas short story collection is from the same author. I read no omnibuses, but I guess if you look at my the Amber Chronicles, that is an omnibus in itself, because it's a omnibus of 10 novels, but I think I've just put them down as trade paperbacks, which is obviously, it should have been omnibus, but I just started out with one thing and then I stuck to it. And I haven't read a screenplay, but I don't mind that too much. They are not my favorite types of format anyway. Now the next thing I looked into was the year published, and what I would like to say is that I at least read something from all the years except for 2020, and that is only because I don't really read very many arcs. So I don't have any arcs from 2020 that I've been reading ahead or anything. So yeah, I'm happy that I read something from each month, that I haven't neglected any each month, that I haven't neglected any years. So I read 1 book from the 20s, 1 book from the 30s, 1 book from the 50s, and 1 book from the 60s. So even if I did say before that I haven't read any classics, some of these books that I read from these years could be considered classics, depending on when it becomes modern classics and stuff. But I personally probably looked at them more as their own genre, the genre that they most relate to. So a genre fiction instead of classics, because I think one of them is Dorothy L. Sayers' mystery, the Whose Body, which is a mystery, and it's probably on a mystery instead of classics, as well as The Hobbit is considered a fantasy classic, but it's located under fantasy, because that's what where I relate to it most. So I think that I still have read some classic books, but they are most present in their own genres, if you will. Then I read 4 books from the 70s, which was probably Roger Zelazny books. I read 12 books from the 80s, which is Stephen King and Terry Pratchett, I think. I read 10 books set in the 90s, not 90 books, which is also Terry Pratchett mostly, I think. And some of them is probably, I've read a lot of serious books, which also is why I think 37 in the 2000s, which is my largest chunk. I read, because I think because I worked so much on my series last year, there's a lot of my series that are pretty old, but I'm working on them and going up to date with them. I read 4 books set in 2010. I read 1 book in 2011, 5 books in 2012, 3 books in 2013, and I think that this is because this time is at present pretty old, and the books that I read from this is again my series backlist. So otherwise I don't really have any books on my TBR from this time. I think the majority of it comes from 14 and after, because that's when I started book 2. No, that's when I started Goodreads and started adding to my TBR. So I've read 13 books from 2014, 10 books from 2015, 11 books from 2016, 24 books from 2017, which is my second biggest year, 20 books from 2018, and 19 books were 2019 releases. So The next thing I looked at was the page length, and I'm happy to say that I read something for almost all categories except the category between 900 and 999 pages. But otherwise, I read something for each category. Not surprisingly, the majority of the books I read are between 300 and 399 pages, because the average book length is between 250 and 380-ish pages. That is the average book is lying in that amount. So that's also why 200 and 299 is so big. But yeah, which goes into the longest book. The longest book I read this past year was A Dance with Dragons by George R. R. Martin. It comes in at 1153 pages. The shortest book is Nook and Jewel by, which is a graphic work that is illustrated by Peter Madsen, the same who do the Valhalla comics, but it's written, I think, by Cecil something. It's a kids book, and it's about Christmas, and it's the 12th in that series, and I haven't read any other books from that, but I will probably try out some more in the future. In terms of the locations, I haven't looked at that in a while, I think all year, but let's see. 14 of the books that I read, I got from Book Depository. 11 I got from Amazon. 40 of them I got from the library, so they were free. 2 of them were from Arnold Busk, which is a Danish chain bookstore. Then I read 8 books from Kindle Store. I read 18 Audible books. I read 1 book from cdon.com. I read 61 books from Storytel. I read 11 books from awesomebooks.com, which is the place that I buy the majority of my Discworld books, for instance. I read 5 books from Amazon Marketplace, 3 Humble Bundles, and 2 gifts, and 2 Fantasy Festival books, like books that I hauled from the Fantasy Festival, which I just started tracking after the Fantasy Festival. So actually, I think 2 or 3 of my Mercer Thompson books is also from the Fantasy Festival that I've read. So I'm happy to see I used my library so much, because that means I got a lot of free book. Storytel is my most used service, which I'm also pretty happy with, because I have unlimited access to the books from this, both ebooks and audiobook, because I pay a monthly fee for them. And now let's move on to serious standalone stuff. I read 57 books that were standalones and 127 serious books. Out of those 127 books, I read 37 that were new started series, and 68 of them were ongoing, and 8 of them I completed, and 4 of the series books were where I caught up to a series, and then I DNF'd 10 series out of this. And I still think that the amount of series that I start is a little bit high. But I'm happy to say that at least some of them that I've started, I've already continued with. Not a lot, but some of them, which is definitely okay. And also considering how many ongoing books I read this past year, I'm not too worried about it, because that will mean I will catch up to a lot of series soon. And I will definitely also complete a couple of series very soon. So it's not for nothing, and I would have liked to have finished books and caught up a little bit higher, because I think I set myself a goal of finishing 10 series and catching up to 5. But I was a little bit short of that, but hopefully that will mean I will finish more series this year, because I chose to focus on some ongoing series instead. In terms of my ratings, I read 26 5 stars, I read 22 4.5 stars, I read 77 4 stars, so not surprisingly, that's the biggest amount. I read 19 3.5 star books, 23 star books, 7 2.5 stars, 6 2 stars, and 1 that was a 1 star, which is an average of 3.9. So it wasn't it was an overall good year. In terms of my enjoyment of them, because I definitely know that it was higher than last year's average. But I would like to try in the future and be a little bit more critical about books and not be afraid of giving them like 1 or 1.5 stars. I don't give 1 stars to books that I feel like others would like. But I don't know if that's correct of me, because I can see why other people would like it, but still I didn't enjoy it, so shouldn't I give the rating that I felt like it was? Like if the writing is okay, it won't get a 1 star, but yeah, I don't know. It's difficult for me to explain, but I hope that I will be able to give more. In some way, I hope that I will be able to give more 1 and 1.5 star books ratings out when there's a book that I don't enjoy. But I also think one of the reasons why I don't have as many is because I've been better at DNFing books when I don't feel like they are my type of books. I think I DNF'd 6 books last year. Maybe they would have been 1 stars or 1.5 stars if I had completed them. But yeah. In terms of author gender, I read 65 from male authors and 112 from women authors. And then there was 1 book that was co-written by both genders. But not surprisingly to me, women takes the highest number. Even if I go and look at the singular individual author, the books that I read from male authors are also from the same, like Stephen King and Terry Pratchett. They take up 15 of the books alone. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. Which leads me into the most read authors part, because I read 5 books by Jodie Taylor. I read 6 books by Hiromu Arakawa, which are the Fullmetal Alchemist books. And Jodie Taylor is the Chronicles of St. Mary's books. I read 5 books by Roger Zelazny, who is the author of the Amber Chronicles. If I had stuck to my plans, I would have read 9, but I didn't. I read 5 books by Robin Carr. I would have read 6 if I stuck to my plans, but I didn't. I read 8 books by Victoria Thompson, which I'm really happy about. So she's my second most read author. Stephen King, I read 6 books by, which is he's on a joint second place, but Hiromu Arakawa is manga, so I consider Stephen King being a little bit higher because there are bigger books. And Terry Pratchett takes the top spot with 9 books on his own, which is not surprising because I read those for the Stacking the Series challenge. The last thing I wanted to look into is actually I wanted to see how well I've been doing on my TBR overall. So with every month and how many books I added to my TBR books, I did a little sheet of every month. I wrote down, for instance, June, I had 14 books on my TBR. 13 of them I completed, I read so far, and 1 of them I didn't start. So that is a good statistic, but overall, for the total amount in 2019, I had 162 books on TBRs, monthly TBRs. I'm only looking at monthly TBRs, not the readathon TBRs. If I've done some separately. Out of those 162 books from a TBR, 134 of them I've read. I have started 11 of them, and then there's been 13 of them that I haven't started, and I DNF'd 4 of the books that I put on this. So overall, I'm really happy that at least when I do make a TBR, that I mostly stick to it, that I get back, even if I don't get to it the specific month, I go back and read it later, so that I make sure that the books that I actually put on my TBR to read, I'm almost likely to pick the majority of them up. I think this is a pretty good percentage. And the majority of the books that I didn't read and get to are actually from December, because in December I had 13 books on my TBR. I only read 4. I think it says 5 here, but I didn't get to that last book in time. I started 1 of them and I didn't even get to 7 of them. So 7 out of the 13 that I didn't start is actually from December. So in total, out of all the other 11 months, there's only been 6 books that I haven't touched from all of my TBRs. So I think that's pretty decent. And I also would like to mention that I read 47 books that were from my own personal physical shelf, so that I got through 47 TBR books from my shelf that I had added to my shelf before reading them, so not books that I had purchased afterwards and put on my red shelf. And then I also got to 11 Kindle books. I think I said 8, but the Kindle book line is also my Humble Bundle reads and my ARCs that I got from authors. So that adds the extra 3-4 books to my totals. So I'm really happy about my stats for 2019. Let me know in the comments down below how you did, and do you track your reading with reading statistics, and is there anything that you're more interested in looking at than others? Let me know about that, and if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next video very soon. Goodbye!